We're happy to be on the air on CityNews Halifax and our nation's capital, CityNews Ottawa. Pretty cool.
know. This was our news when we did our little recap interview here just before the holidays. I think it was actually maybe Christmas Eve. We did our kind of a year-end wrap-up. We put a little teaser out there, and for our listeners, our loyal listeners here in Halifax, that something new was coming, and we're on in Ottawa as well. So you're listening to us Saturday and Sunday.
That's right. So some maritime hospitality from Halifax to Ottawa, right? What would you tell? Well, if you wanted to be a true maritimer and you wanted Ottawa people to recognize or realize what maritime hospitality is about, what would that message be?
I think probably people in Ottawa already know that, Maritimers are like the most friendly people. Like, we hold the door for people. We probably answer your call.
I don't hold the door for anybody.
No, I don't know. I think we work really hard too. And, I think the one thing that's really interesting, about Halifax, we were rated the #1 city by Maclean's magazine. Can you believe that? I really obviously believe about, lots of great things are going on here, and there's a lot of, positivity. And, it's been a tough couple years, no matter where you live across the world. But I think, we have fared relatively well. And, I think the population growth is really, is speaking to that.
And the housing market across the country it's the same story, particularly in large urban areas like Ottawa and Halifax, obviously. But it's just red hot, and it continues to be really hot, right?
Yeah, it definitely continues to be very, very hot. And, at some points during, we'll call it the last, I'm trying to think about this, 22 months that we've been really living this COVID dream, I guess, here in Halifax. At one point, probably about every third client that we had were people relocating from Ontario. And, for better or worse, we've had some, price increases here in Halifax, but I think there's a lot of good things going on, and I think we're going to still see a lot of population growth. One thing that they're projecting is the population in Halifax is going to grow by about 25% over the next 5 years. So, I'm pretty excited about the growth. We're here to help the people that live in Halifax and really across Atlantic Canada, arrange mortgage financing. We have a lot of relocation. And, there's a lot of military people that live here in Halifax.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who work for the federal government. So, if you live in Halifax or if you're listening to us in Ottawa, we'd love to transact with you. We'd love to educate you. And hopefully you're really going to enjoy our show. And this is our season 4 of having, a show on the air. Now, obviously, I was on the air and you've been on the air for years, but this is the 4th year that we've been doing this format of this Mortgage 101. And, lots of great feedback, I think, over the years. And I think even last year, we've just helped so many people. And I think it's about breaking down some of the barriers. And we've talked about financial literacy. Yeah. We talked a lot about, refinance, first-time home buyers, the Bank of Canada. Lots of things that really impact Canadians. And, I'll repeat it again. The biggest asset in a lot of households is the home. And, we're certainly going to talk a lot about those things all year long. So we encourage people to tune in.
Yeah, and absolutely. And a lot of people have located from places like Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, all over the country.
Across the country.
And you've seen this to Halifax, right? So for people in the Ottawa region, paint that picture. Just let everybody know kind of what the experience has been like here in Halifax for that. And it's because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think the one thing that kind of like rings true to me is kind of like what our average house prices are. I think at one time, the average was probably very similar to what it was in Ottawa. I think Halifax and Ottawa have a lot of similarities. Yeah. And obviously, house prices have increased, across the nation. In Halifax, you can still get a brand new construction property for $500,000. That exists. Yeah. And
I don't think that exists in Ottawa.
I'm not sure if it does anymore. I feel like they've had a lot more growth than we have. Yeah. And, a couple of years ago, our average home price was about $325,000. But now I think we're getting up on that $500,000 mark is kind of where that average home price is. But homeownership is still, doable for a lot of Canadians. we talked about it that, majority of the transactions we're doing either, have a dual income or, have a single borrower that has, a six-figure income. That's typically the majority of the clients that we're seeing. But, we help people in all kinds of different situations. And I think that's really unique about Nova Scotia and about Halifax. If you can't afford to buy something here, there are many other areas of the province that you may be able to buy something that's still kind of within your price range. And we're seeing more and more borrowers buying kind of what we consider like the outskirts of the city or maybe more rural areas of Nova Scotia. I think with the way that people are working now and a lot of, work from home, there's some companies that the employees are never going back to the office.
Oh, yeah.
And, I think at one point last year, we're really excited kind of about, things are getting back to normal. It was really busy. We're actually recording our show that you're listening to right now from our office in downtown Halifax. And there was one point where, the traffic was really getting busy and we're seeing more people, like even in our office tower. And I think with this last variant, I think the kind of that growth trajectory have changed a little bit. And I think even when we're thinking about things like the Bank of Canada and like increases, I think everybody's kind of doing a little bit of rethinking right now. Yeah. But we're certainly still seeing a lot of population growth and we're seeing a lot of people relocate here from across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. But so the dream of home ownership for first-time home buyers, though, this is a story that we've talked a lot about over the past year, that it's now becoming basically unobtainable for too many people. What are your thoughts, or what do you want to say concerning that?
You know what? I think that homeownership is unattainable for some people.
It is, yeah.
Who
otherwise wouldn't have been.
I think
2 years ago, even.
I don't know if the incomes have followed the increases that maybe the house prices have, and I think that's kind of a symptom of inflation. So it's not just home prices that have increased. Chicken breasts and steak. If you go to the grocery store, they've increased 4x. Yeah. Home prices have not increased 4x, thank goodness. Yeah. But I think there's some things that have definitely increased more than home prices. But I think that's almost like on the forefront, especially for a first-time home buyer. Like, we understand how challenging it is. And you really want to have a lot of confidence when you're making an offer on a home, Todd, right? Yeah. And we have had some first-time home buyers that, we're getting them a pre-approval and it's kind of at the top of what their affordability is. But within that affordability, they may not be getting their dream home. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, what? That's okay. Yeah. Home ownership is maybe not everyone can have it, but it is doable at some point for people. You know what I mean? Like, you might not be able to buy your brand new construction property that was architecturally designed and all this stuff. Maybe you need to buy a starter home. Yeah. And starter homes are definitely more expensive. And maybe you're going to have to do some work to the starter home. But guess what? That's what our parents did. And I think if we've kind of lived in a little bit of this illusion that first-time home buyers can buy, their dream home. And I think a dream home was maybe more available pre-pandemic, kind of for first-time home buyers. But I think now they kind of had to reset their expectations, which, getting into the housing market at all, I think is sometimes the first step. And then kind of build up that equity. And then, how can you leverage that property to buy another one? Or how can you maybe sell that property to get into the home that you really want?
So over the next little while, what do you want to talk about? What can people expect over the next hour?
We're going to be talking about Merry-Detmas. It's our favorite time of the year here. Maybe not your very favorite time at home, but we're certainly going to talk about Merry-Detmas and, what does refinance look like and how do the mechanics work? So Merry-Detmas to you.
That sounds like a buzzkill.
I don't know. Well, I think it's going to be a great time.
Yeah, because obviously people spend too much over Christmas. It's just they get carried away, right?
And I don't know if it's just Christmas, Todd, but I think that some people, really have had a focus on health and wellness in January and New Year's resolutions. I think the New Year's resolution this year is around financial health and wellness, and how can we really talk about that Merry-Detmas, and how can we find a solution?
All right, so we're going to talk about that very issue and a few other things here on City News in Halifax and Ottawa. We'll be back.